Hey, FanboyNation.
This is your pal Daffy Duck, and you're watching.
We're watching Fanboy.
Fanboy, etc.
FanboyNation.
I assume Tom.
Happy Veterans Day, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. Today we have seems to be our annual Writers Roundtable. How is everybody today? Let's start by going in a circle. Robert Davies, Gary Morgeinstein, and Stephanie Gray.
We're doing great.
Doing well.
Yes.
Doing
Thank
well.
God.
I feel like a veteran, so
You are a veteran.
I am a veteran, yeah.
Well, thank you for your
Happy
service.
Veterans Day. Yes,
Thank you.
indeed.
And for everybody that served in Vietnam that's been forgotten over the past 45 to 50 years, you're
Yes.
now remembered as well.
Yes. Damn straight.
So fill me in, everybody. What's going on? You know, it's the election has passed. So for some people, this November has been utopian. For others, it's been dystopian. And, let's hop right into it. Stephanie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. So tell us about your latest book and which way you're facing, not in the political realm, but in your in your writing.
Well, my latest book came out in October 1st. It was a fantasy, but my next book coming out next year, it's untitled right now, is actually a zombie book because why not?
Well, we need more things going on in this world that it's going to make us run. Are they slow zombies or fast zombies?
Actually, it takes place after the zombie apocalypse.
Okay.
So it says people are rebuilding. Zombies are still there,
right?
But it's the world dealing with them.
Okay.
But they're your average zombie.
No problem. And just so everybody knows, we are going to experience some feedback. So if you hear anything, please don't blame us. It is something we couldn't handle. But Gary, tell us about your latest situation.
Well, my new novel, my dystopian baseball science fiction novel, A Fastball for Freedom, will be published March 25th by BHC Press. We all march under the BHC Press banner, and it's set in the start of the 22nd century after America and the West has lost World War III to Islam, and America is rebuilding, surrounded, and the theme of the new book is, can baseball, robots, and faith save the world? For something better.
Baseball, robots, and faith. I dig it.
Yes.
And Robert, what about yours?
Currently, I'm going back in time. My work in progress is actually a period piece from the late 1800s, the Spanish-American War era, about a naval officer who finds the dark side of his nature and runs into an assassin who is murdering and running amok, and their paths, I suppose, they intersect at an inconvenient spot. So it's a historical period piece. My foray into dystopian is in the past, although I will revisit it. Mine was a little bit similar to Stephanie's. That's a rebuilding of human society after an apocalypse. And the book is called When the River Ran Dry, which is, I don't know how long it's been out. Gary, when did I publish that? It's been 3 or 4 years by now.
Yeah, 3, yeah.
And it got me an IPPY award, so somebody liked the darn thing. But that was my first trip into dystopian and utopian, and I blend both of them, which was a little bit hard to do at first, but it was necessary to tell the story properly. So I will revisit it via actually my next project after the one I'm working now may very well be a full throttle dystopian story. I'm vacillating because of how it's probably going to be received by a lot of readers. It's going to piss people off, and although I'm good at that, I'd rather avoid anger. But that's going to be a dystopian story, and hopefully I'll get started on that in 2022.
I mean, can we even avoid anger anymore? I mean, that's another issue. You can't. You don't have to purposely offend people, but there's so many tripwires out there that you're not even aware of, that you just have to go on as artists, and you have a vision, and you're going to write your story, and if people are going to jump all over you, then they're going to jump all over you.
Absolutely.
Now, I did avoid this story idea I've had for a long time, and I wanted to write it earlier, and I didn't for that very reason. I was very hesitant because I know that in such a bifurcated society, we are polarized to an extreme, right? Especially now, and it's not going to get any better for a while. So I know this is going to alienate readers, and when you're trying to build a brand, the business side of this says don't do that. The artist side says, the hell with you, I need to write the story because it's important, and that's a conundrum. It's hard to navigate your way through it.
Gotcha. And Stephanie, who have you upset this week?
Hopefully nobody. My husband's deployed right now, so I'm kind of on my own, and I'm not really talking to people. I talk to family on the phone, but hopefully I haven't pissed off anybody.
Since we can't avoid any turn at this time. But
well, I just kind of figure, as far as writing goes, you really can't make everybody happy. So you just need to say screw them and do whatever makes you happy personally.
Yeah.
Well, take us through your writing processes. We'll start with Stephanie and work our way back to Robert, and we'll put Gary in the middle this time. But right now, like we said, we had an election, so 51% of the country is happy one way, 48% is displeased the other way. When you want to, where do you find your utopian views when you want to write something that's more positive and upbeat? And then do you just turn on the news and go, boom, there's my inspiration for a dystopian story, whether it's a short story or a full-form novel or even just an essay?
Really, a lot of my ideas come from weird dreams I have. I know people say they have weird dreams all the time, but I just remember mine and kind of go from there. Or, I don't know, just kind of think of a twisted way to put things. I have a short story on my website called Instinct, and it was around March Madness that I got the idea for it a couple of years ago. And it's about a guy who plays March Madness, the brackets where you go down, and he wins. And it turns out he has this incredible instinct to be able to predict anything. He's even able to find missing people, and he becomes so overwhelmed that he winds up going off the grid, and he wants to hide, and these people don't like that he's hiding, so they wind up eating his guts to get his gut instinct. So it's just random places that I get these ideas, and I'm definitely a pantser about it. I hate doing an outline. So I just kind of go with whatever comes out.
And what about you, Gary? Where do you find your happiness for a utopian story?
Well, it's utopian in the hope of the characters. And even though I've created a very grim dystopian, I think ultimately it's all about its character driven and its people's need to be hopeful, even under the worst circumstances. You could take how people survive the concentration camps, for example, how people survive aerial blitzes, on and on, the worst depravities that human beings are capable of unleashing on each other. And yet people remain hopeful, because otherwise we all would have died out a long time ago. And I think all of us, we have the advantage, being speculative fiction, is that we look into the future. And so you could get away with a lot more. You could say, well, whoa, I'm making this up. This is the future. That really isn't a metaphor for what's happening now. And that gives you, science fiction gives you a greater blanket of flexibility and wiggle room to operate it.
And Robert, what about yourself?
I'm a hopeless outliner. I wish I could do this off the cuff the way Stephanie does, but I find the structure is necessary, and to some degree it constrains me, because especially in that genre, either dystopian or utopian, you're going into places that are profoundly, viscerally personal. It becomes emotional. It becomes either such a soaring, wonderful, hopeful place, or just a depraved nightmare. And it gives you the freedom to create, I think, more than any other kind of fiction, including science fiction, because it's so personal. I don't know how to put it, but I'm weary of stories that are predictable, that are going to end up with a cheerful, happy ending. That's why I'm now drawn to dystopian, and I want to go down a path that isn't so nice, in the end, because that's the definition of dystopian to me. There isn't a way out, and that's something that a reader might not want to hear initially, but in retrospect, I think that's where I'm going with my next approach to this, is profoundly dystopian, such that there is no exit point. There's no happy ending.
To touch on society a bit, so many people were so scared of the Orwellian model of 1984 that they forgot the Huxley model of Brave New World. And it seems that we've reached Brave New World status with information overload, whether it's social media, whether it's a 24-hour news cycle, whether it's just continuous conversation, bombardment with arguments, instant gratification. For people that aren't familiar with the book, there's the Disney movie WALL-E that was sort of dystopian but had a hopeful ending. Where do you see that as being either detrimental or influential in your writing, because you don't have time necessarily to retract into your own, what the ancient church fathers would have called the desert of the mind, to pull away from the world and society and to reflect and focus and meditate or pray. And, we don't really have that opportunity now. How do you retreat into the desert of the mind for yourselves with this information overload? And it's open to whomever wants to start.
Well, I took care of it because in my world, America is run by something called the family, which goes back to basics. And essentially, the most important things are relationships, personal relationships, loving each other. There's no identity politics. So social media has been banned under the anti-narcissism laws. So there's no, because, you don't, the 1,000 people on Facebook are really not your friends. And the society encourages real relationships. Of course, that creates the challenge. How do people communicate? Well, now we have the USPS, which is the finest mail service in the world, and there you go. So that goes back into when you create dystopian worlds, you have rules, which we all have, and we have to follow those rules, as challenging as they sometimes are.
I know for my book that's coming out next year, it's one of the things that I changed was the way that politics are handled. Right now, whenever we have an election coming up, a couple of years out, we start seeing campaigning and everything else. So I made it in mind that you can only do it for 6 months before the actual election.
6 months? You're generous. I want it less than 3.
Well,
Weekend would be nice, yeah.
Make your pitch and then be quiet. I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I think the British have it for 6 weeks and the Germans have it for up to 8 weeks. So
yeah,
I think that's something we need to steal from the Europeans is the anti-campaigning models.
Agreed.
Yes.
I think that the place that, so let me ask, do you mean where do I go as a writer to get into the desert of the mind, or my characters?
You as a writer.
Okay, then that I project, I think we all do, we project to an extreme when we are either pantsing or outlining. There's a place that we go to put ourselves into a story. It's better written if it mirrors what we perceive to be our place within it. And when I look into that future, I tend to write my characters and their responses, which are human, against this machine, something that is an oppressive system that creates this dystopia. And isolating myself is a lot easier, I think. Well, it is for me because I'm semi-retired and I don't have to bother with a lot of the day-to-day stuff. And I do what's called a sprint and drift back in my Navy days. I write like crazy, and then I drift and do some research, and then I write like crazy, and then I drift and kind of gassing it and then coasting. And in that coasting place is where I tend to isolate myself, and I go into that dystopian world, and I can do it driving down the road in my car. It's a really nice place to do that. I go for a drive. And it's more difficult now because we're all forced into this little box, and we wear our masks and our environment suits, and and we disinfect with acid, and we do all this stupid shit we have to do to survive COVID. But it's, for me, a good place to escape is just an ordinary ride in the car. You can talk to yourself without sounding like you're a neurotic, and I am able to work those things out, but it's almost like an actor has to do or perform by method, and that's the closest thing I can think of is to go away from everyone else and put yourself in that world. That's how I have to do it.
Well, Robert,
Do you listen to music?
I'm sorry?
Do you listen to music? Does anybody listen to music while they do it? While they write?
It's interesting. When I research, I have to have it. When I'm writing, I can't have a sound. That's a really good question. I'm glad you asked, because I'm really a bipolar twit. If I'm writing, the writing part, I don't want anything. I want no sound, no disruption. When I'm researching, I go and listen to Khachaturian or Tchaikovsky or something typically classical that is not jarring and doesn't have any vocals. But that's a really great way to get into that groove. Something that lends itself to the environment that you're writing in. Yes, I have to have that when I'm researching. Good question.
Since you brought it up, Stephanie, what about yourself?
I listen to music. It's like Robert said, it has to be without vocals though, but it depends. It's, and it's usually the same song on repeat, only so that it's there, but it's not in the forefront of my mind, just kind of background noise, but it helps kind of keep me going.
Exactly. I loop mine too.
And Gary?
Well, we have so many voices in our head as is that we don't,
It's true.
Come on, let's be honest. Show me an emotionally moderate writer and I'll show you an accountant. Really, come on. We're not, that's why we do this, because, it's better than, the farms, right? Or drinking too much. I mean, drinking a little is okay. I think that let's not underestimate the importance of staring. There's also just staring off into space. And we've been married just over 6 years. When we first got married, my wife would sometimes insist, because she loves me, of sitting in the same room with me, which didn't last too long, because I'd be writing and she'd say, "Honey, what's wrong?" I say, "Nothing." She said, "Well, your face is all twisted and you look upset." I said, "No, it's my characters. I'm fine." But if you don't do that, you don't know. And she writes plays and the stuff, but it's different than a novel. Is a whole different ballgame. A novel is the great marathon. I don't care how long it is. It's just huger and more difficult than any other form of writing. I really think so. And I don't diss any other forms. But we need that enormous space to just process and think. And I know about you guys, but it really never stops. We never stop being writers. And that's also, that's something to deal with, right?
They say that the 3 o'clock hour, the witching hour, is the hour of artists and poets. And a lot of people find inspiration in the middle of the night. Do you find yourself getting up at all hours of the night to jot something down, whether it's a note, whether it's a single page, an entire chapter? How does that affect your life, whether it's, your sleeping habits or even your personal situation where you could be with your kids or your pets or your significant other, and then all of a sudden, hold on, I got to write this down in the middle of, say, an argument or a conversation?
All too often. I've been burned by waking up and something is striking. It's a dialogue sometimes. Sometimes it's just a concept. And I think, it's okay, I'll remember in the morning. Don't worry. And
famous last words.
Right. And it's gone. And I'm enraged and I'm so furious with myself. And I learned that a long time ago. And I will get out of the bed and pad up here to my office and sit down bleary eyed and the harsh lights coming at me. But dang it, I'm going to get that passage down. I have to. I'm a nocturnal person by nature. I'm not a morning person. I function best late at night, and I'm not usually up until 3, but I have done it enough times before to say, or not to be able to say that I haven't done it. But I think there's a lot of truth to that. I don't know why. Maybe the rhythm of your body to work and school and dealing with children and so forth, I think it compels you. If I had none of those distractions, if I was single, for example, and lived on my own, I would be up way late doing this. And you kind of go and then you just run out of gas and you have to sleep. But in those 2 or 3 hours before you run out, that's where I'm really in the groove. This time of day, it's very difficult to write. It's just difficult for me.
And what about you, Stephanie?
Well, with my husband being gone, I definitely write more at night. I don't stay up to 3 a.m. because I'm not 20. but yeah, I have to have a reasonable bedtime now. Are you kidding me? But no, I prefer. But whenever my husband's home, I definitely write more during the day because that's when he's home. That's our time to be together. But for some reason, the night is just, I don't know what it is. It's just, you look outside, you don't see anything. It's like a blank canvas and you can kind of imagine things playing out in the dark.
And Gary?
Well, from wherever all this happens, it happens from somewhere. I mean, no one's ever explained really where the whole creative process really comes from. It's just, a blending, a distillation. It's, who knows, the muses, everything, the dark shadows in the middle of the night. We don't really know. It just happens. So you just have to go with it. I mean, 3 o'clock this morning, I was up with my dog, Tiger, eating mozzarella sticks.
We hang out at Gary's house if he's serving mozzarella sticks at 3 a.m.
Yeah,
That's it. That's not, something isn't right. And what are you going to do? You just, after a certain point, you just let it happen. It washes over you. Again, there's something disorienting, but ultimately healthy, because writers don't suppress a lot. We might suppress in our personal lives. I'm not saying we don't, but in our work lives, it's flying out at us, and there's something positive about that.
I think Ian Fleming was guilty of that. He didn't like having a desk job working with the British intelligence, so we got the James Bond series out of it.
Yeah, must be nice.
Well, it probably was at the time. Robert, I am a little disappointed in you, though. You do live in the Pacific Northwest, and not one Bigfoot story yet. So,
yeah, and it's really close. So he's supposed to live very close to where I am at. So, and I haven't seen him yet. I used to go fishing in the middle of nowhere, and Sasquatch he ain't hanging. He's either disappointed with the society or, the food's not good enough, because I don't ever see him. Right. I don't know where he's at.
With utopian stories, there's still issues that go on. Like, let's take the Jetsons, for example. That's a futuristic, semi-utopian story, but George still has to walk the dog on the space treadmill. He still has to deal with his boss, Mr. Spacely, and everything else that goes along with that. So even in a positive utopian future, there's still day-to-day hindrances. What in your current situation that you would deem utopian for some still is a hindrance for you, other than Gary walking the dog and feeding him mozzarella sticks at 3 a.m? And I can only imagine poor Tiger's walks taking 9 hours after that, especially if the dog's lactose intolerant. What's something that's utopian in your life?
Sounds a lot to me like the Roddenberry theorem and this world that Gene Roddenberry envisioned and what drove him to create Star Trek. It was picked up upon by the Next Generation production people, and they took it to ridiculous lengths. But it was in the spirit of a true utopian future society where wants and needs are essentially the same, and that your mind is free to do whatever it needs to do. Your creative side, your civil side, the mundane and the administrative superstructure that we live in is largely, almost to a fault, automated, and you don't have to think or worry beyond the things that are pleasurable to you, that are interesting to you. And that to me makes it so difficult to go in a utopian direction, and why I'm more drawn to dystopian. Where do you draw the line? Where does the ordinary part of life begin to injure the notion of utopia? Is it and it's, to me, it's infrastructure. So I don't know. I think probably the biggest challenge.
Right. I mean, basic human needs. Every people ultimately are lonely. They want love. They want to be happy. There's really some fundamental needs that sometimes that you can't forget when you write a dystopian fiction, because that's what you're really addressing. Most people don't want to be heroes. It's thrust upon them. And I think that makes the strongest kind of fiction, is to just bail back into the basic concept of human relationships and cowardice and bravery and confusion and screwing up repeatedly, and because we all do that. That's what I think, that's what readers identify with most, because you've got to give the readers, of course, a familiar world. That's the tightrope that we walk. We create these fascinating worlds, really cool, and we come up with all these inventions and social world building, but it still has to be about people. And I think writers fail when they try to gimmick it up too much.
Do you think those of us like that look to these utopian stories forget that when we are too comfortable, we start creating problems for ourselves, and we start creating arguments because, you know, we're not living in Yemen, who has a famine because of blockades on the northern border from Saudi Arabia, and then in the Gulf, not allowing supplies to come in. Or, you know, what happened between Azerbaijan and Armenia that recently ended for the next foreseeable few hours, or, you know, anything else of that sort, you know, where we become too comfortable that we need to cause problems. Like, you see those stories, you know, this isn't sci-fi or anything, but, you know, those shows or movies that take place in the South, and then the church ladies are arguing with each other because they have nothing better to do because their lives are so mundane at that point. Do you think utopian societies in the future could create that? Like, you know, you mentioned Star Trek as well, Robert.
Yeah, to me, if you go down that path and wish to avoid a utopia becoming so commonplace that it's an anathema to itself down the road, then it obliges you to put borders around it, to establish rules that are now leaving the realm of utopia and starting to edge toward dystopian. And so it's as we circle back to the beginning of the discussion, for our characters, the worlds that we build, if it's truly utopian, then it has taken that into account, and it is not at risk of becoming a danger to itself. How you write that, I don't know. I'm not sure. That's an interesting question. I don't know that I would want to go down that path, because a true utopia, in its ultimate expression, if you wanted to take it that far out, would not run the risk of becoming a dull, boring place that's a danger to itself. How to do that, I don't know. Stephanie's got zombies she can shoot. That's pretty cool and very handy. But obviously that's diametrically opposed to the notion. She's dealing with a savage world. We're talking about a world that is utterly free of that savagery. How you construct it, no.
Stephanie, I'm going to ask you this, since your husband is currently deployed and Robert's a little removed from his military service. Since your husband kind of lives on edge 24 hours a day while overseas, when he finally comes home, does he become fidgety and bored because he's so used to that level of intensity in his day-to-day life at work?
This is his 10th deployment, so this is an old hat for him at this point.
Okay.
No, I mean, with what he does over there, I mean, he's able to compartmentalize. He's been in the military for like 23 years now, so he's been trained to do that kind of stuff anyway. But no, when he comes home, it's, even whenever he's going to work on a day-to-day basis, he's able to leave that. And whenever he comes home, he's just my husband. It's very much, he's normal, but as normal as he can be. I mean, there's some things that, we just don't talk about because he's not ready to, maybe down the road one day in like 25 years or something, but no, but not everybody's able to do that. You do have, I have had friends who've come back from deployment and they're a different person. It's things, they see things and, but no, for my husband, no, he's not fidgety at all. It's not, but I also know, like, speaking for both of us, that neither one of us, as far as a utopian society actually us being able to ever achieve that, I don't think that's ever going to be able to happen. I mean, remember The Matrix? I mean, they said that they tried to make that perfect and it got rejected over and over again. They lost tons of crops, as they put it. I don't think you'll ever be able to have, in reality, that kind of society. But I have to agree with Robert. I I don't even know how you'd be able to write something like that.
Yeah.
And Gary, would you be able to write something like that that's utopian at some point?
No, not me. I need edge. I need darkness. I really need the gritty dystopian feel.
That's just because you're old school Brooklyn.
So
That's just because you're old school Brooklyn before it was even gentrified.
well, I have, the Islamic Empire controlling most of the world. So I have that sort of tyranny. I have in America, God is outlawed. In Islamic Empire, only one religion is allowed. So I try to have a cruelty, but again, I have people trying to figure out a way through it.
Fair enough. Our time is a little limited. We have a few more minutes, but what can you see in your own writing that either people have been displeased with you or has kind of come to fruition as like a weird prediction that you didn't expect, that was just a fantasy in your own world that you start seeing patterns in modern society?
Man, you should have just hit me in the head with a sledgehammer, and it would have been quicker and less painful. Jeez, that's a tough one. Holy moly! Go ahead, Gary. Bail us out of this.
Well, I have dystopian baseball, which is kind of a rare subgenre. So people, like baseball, because very few writers write about baseball in the future because they feel it's not going to be there, probably with good reason. So I have robot umpires. I have ball players being excessively political. I have a few things like that. I have, the waning of patriotism. The military is considered second, third rate, if even that, because they're blamed for losing World War III, even though really it was the politicians' fault, but the military takes it on the chin. So there are things, again, that metaphorically are like current times, but not, because it's 80 years in the future, and it's my job to make it a little different.
Got it. Stephanie?
My stuff isn't that deep to be able to predict the future, to be candid with you. But you made a comment about is there something that writers or readers didn't like about what we've written? I noticed in some of one of the comments in my last book, which is about witches, they didn't like that I made them just be witches. There's no spell casting, there's no, runes or anything like that. I made it too free for them. They were unhappy about that. So I've learned that, if you're going to write about something, regardless what the genre is, you still have to have restrictions in there to make it more plausible, I guess.
Okay. And Robert, now you've had your chance to look over the menu and finally decide on your entree.
I want the scallops. I'm sorry. The two things. One was a moment when my preparation was celebrated. I went over the top in trying to research the way gene sequencing happens and this DNA level stuff that I had to have for the second book in my sci-fi trilogy. And it was so long. It took me 4 months to come up with a way to engineer a solution to a genetic problem. And it seemed as though that was going to be overlooked. And there was a doctor in San Diego who reviewed the book and said, "Oh, thank goodness this moron writer got it right. They researched the process of gene sequencing and messenger RNA and all this other kind of stuff that I forgotten. I had to go back and relook at. I wasn't that good at chemistry for sure, or biochemistry. And so it was, it wasn't prescient to the future, but it made me feel better. It was actually a little bit opposite. There's plenty of things that people don't like about the way I write my books. I take too long to come to the point, and I'm too much of a windbag and a blowhard in my dialogue, and so we all get hammered for our style. But that was really gratifying, that the painful research I had to put into a subject I'm not terribly skilled with ended up getting the attention of somebody who is skilled in the art, and they passed on it. So I was grateful for that beyond measure. I think the only thing that my dystop Utopian book explored a lot of the human artificial intelligence world. That was really what it was predicated in. And I think when I was writing it at the time, I was having an ongoing battle with the Elon Musks of the world, who thought they knew exactly precisely what the future holds for artificial intelligence. And that aggravated me. And it's why I wrote that book. It was a great big middle finger to Elon Musk and the tech industry people. And I thought, I'm going to shoot at them. And I did. And it was, but I'm noticing now, years later, that some of what I was looking for in the behavior of an embodied AI has now found its way into a more mainstream approach, whether it's a movie or robotics that now become embodied. It wasn't foreseeing the future as though I could do that, but I think it supported reality later.
Got it. Well, thank
Glad
you.
you got. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Steph, real quick.
Okay. So I'm glad you got praise for your research. I did, for my first book that came out, it's about serial killers, and I researched different serial killers that were never caught. And of course, I included Jack the Ripper, I included the Atlanta Ripper, and the Cleveland Torso murderer. And a reader actually left a comment that said, the Atlanta Ripper, what a crappy name. You could have done better coming up with a name. It's like, well, that was what they called him. So I'm glad you got praise for your research.
Of course, Stephanie has to get dumped on because, you know, women in literature is completely unheard of these days. No, to tease. But everybody, real quick, where can we find you on social media if we want to connect? And tell us the title of your current book. Stephanie, we'll finish it off with you. Go for it.
Okay. On social media, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook at author S. Gray, and you can find me on my website, stephaniegraybooks.com, and my latest work is A Witchly Influence that came out last month.
Gary?
At Writer Gary on Twitter, and my books are available my author page at bhcpress.com.
Perfect. And Robert?
And it's over hell.
Books at bhc.com as well, same as Gary. r.c.davies books or RC Davies books is Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram handle. Latest book is I suppose it doesn't matter that it's not utopian or dystopian, but it's A Place for the Wicked.
Perfect. Everybody, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, RC. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.